Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping back into 1947, and we're not just looking at dates on a timeline, right? We're trying to understand a profound, literally earth-shattering human experience. We're exploring the hidden histories of partition. You see, if you just try to look at partition as a date in a textbook, it stays flat, it feels distant. But when you look at the real forces at play, the impossible choices people had to make, and the incredibly long aftermath, well, you start to see how one nation's division became millions of private emergencies, all happening at the exact same time.
Imagine waking up one morning, and the neighbors you've known for your entire life are suddenly, inexplicably, complete strangers. And imagine the very first thought in your head isn't about politics at all, but a really desperate, terrifying question. Should we leave tonight or wait? For millions of people in 1947, this wasn't some hypothetical scenario. It was a terrifying reality. It was a massive division that shattered everyday lives, quite literally overnight.
So let's really dive into this. Partition was far, far more than just a political announcement made in some distant capital. It was a severe social rupture. Think of it kind of like a canal in Jaharabad suddenly being diverted. The land around it? Sure, it might look familiar for a few days, but once that water's path changes, the fields dry differently, the old routes are completely blocked, and everyone living nearby is forced to just completely reorganize how they survive. Partition worked exactly like that. The map changed, yes, but the deeper shock was that the everyday patterns people relied on, where they prayed, where they traded, traveled, and just felt safe, were broken in an instant.
Let's move to Section 1, the forces beneath, the hidden engine.
To really understand how such a massive break occurs, we've got to look at the hidden engine driving it. A rupture like this doesn't just appear out of thin air. It happens when stacked pressures build up inside a system until that system simply can't hold its shape anymore. You know, history rarely works through just one single cause, like one leader or one speech. It's actually a lot more like a wall in a really old house. A single crack doesn't bring the whole wall down. But if the foundation shifts and the bricks loosen and the roof starts pressing down heavily, suddenly the entire structure collapses. So, what exactly were these stacked pressures in late colonial India? Well, first off, the British Empire was weakening, totally exhausted by World War II. Think of it like a school playground where a really strict teacher suddenly steps away. The kids don't become instantly peaceful, right? They start testing each other and fighting for control. Second, political identities hardened. It's like being in a crowded train station. Normally, you just notice individuals, but if a fire alarm goes off, you panic and immediately look for large groups to find safety. Politics did exactly that. Third, there was this incredibly bitter fight over representation. Who was going to control the new order? And finally, the rapid, totally uncontrollable spread of fear. This is exactly what happens when fear outpaces facts. And fear doesn't need perfect evidence, does it? It acts like a single spark on completely dry grass. The fire travels fast because the landscape is already prepped to burn. When mistrust gets that high, an everyday market argument suddenly feels like a mortal threat. A rumor from the next village over literally becomes a reason to pack up your entire life and flee. Which brings us to Section 2, Surviving the Rupture, the Human Cost. Let's shift our focus for a second. Let's move from these macro political theories to the urgent, on-the-ground experiences of families. The absolutely crucial point here is the massive disconnect between political reality and lived reality. While politicians were busy debating lines on a redrawn map, ordinary people were facing a terrifying reorganization of their daily lives. Big history always feels abstract until it walks right into your living room. And for these families, history was experienced not as some grand theory, but as immediate danger, extreme uncertainty, and really desperate calculations. Everyday life quickly became just a series of impossible practical choices. Is the familiar road still safe? Can we actually trust the neighbors we've shared meals with for years? What do you pack when you know deep down you might never, ever return? Deciding to leave was a massive risk. But actually, scratch that. Deciding to stay was a massive risk too. Uncertainty just became this incredibly heavy baggage that absolutely everyone was forced to carry. When local trust collapses like that, space itself changes character. A lane you've walked down for decades suddenly feels incredibly threatening. A house is no longer just a house, it's a potential trap. Every single ordinary choice became heavily burdened with moral consequence. Protecting your own family might mean abandoning a lifelong friend. There were simply no painless choices left. People had to make massive life-altering decisions way faster than their world could even make sense of them. And the migration? It wasn't just physical movement across some newly drawn border. It was a profound transformation of belonging. Leaving a home behind meant turning it into a memory wrapped entirely in loss. Arriving in a new city might offer physical safety, sure, but it also meant exile. These people had to learn to live with permanent loss, all while simultaneously trying to rebuild a future on completely unfamiliar ground.
Section 3. A divided memory. The long aftermath. The great tragedy of partition is that massive political questions forced their way into private lives long before people could even comprehend what was being asked of them. A border, as it turns out, is never just geographical. It redraws access to jobs and state protection, yes, but it also brutally divides deeply rooted family networks. It separates ancestry. It literally splits memories right in half. This is exactly why the legacy of partition still so sharply shapes modern identity today. It changed the very story people tell themselves about who we are.
And this brings us to exactly why historians and families still hotly debate the legacy of 1947 today. Was partition a moment of liberation? Was it a profound trauma? Or was it an immense injustice? You see, the facts aren't invisible or vague, but the meaning of those facts, that depends entirely on a person's lived experience, their memory, and exactly where their family stood when those lines were drawn. One person's independence can, quite fundamentally, be another person's catastrophe. If you take away only one thing from this explainer, let it be this. The hidden history of 1947 wasn't just some political settlement made on a single afternoon. It was a simultaneous collapse of imperial power, of interpersonal trust between neighbors, and of the human imagination of a shared future. It was a massive system under immense stress that simply broke. Which leaves us with a lingering thought. Partition shows us exactly what happens when fear moves faster than facts and when large identities override local communities. So when you look at our modern political divisions around the world today, it really begs the question, just how fragile is our own everyday coexistence when fear is allowed to take hold? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.